Throughout the centuries, there have been many women who were executed for a wide variety of crimes. For example, during the reign of Henry VIII, Anne Askew, a Protestant woman, was racked brutally and tortured at the Tower of London, to a point where she could not stand for her own execution. She was later carried to Smithfield, where in front of a large crowd she was burnt as a heretic, and the crowds heard her ear-piercing screams and screeches as the flames rose higher. Also, there were many women who were accused of witchcraft who were hanged in brutal scenes at places such as Tyburn and Newgate Prison in London. But there was one woman from the 16th century from Rome whose life was relatively comfortable. However, she was guilty of a terrible crime of murdering her own father. This was considered one of the worst crimes throughout history, as it was one which was viewed as incredibly disrespectful also. But what is the story of Beatrice Cenci and her execution, but also her murderous antics? But can she also be seen as a victim of her father's awful crimes? Beatrice was born on the 6th of February 1577, and she was the daughter of Ursula Santa Croce and Count Francesco Cenci, who was described as a man of great wealth, but dissolute habits and violent temper. When Beatrice was just 7 years old, her mother passed away, which left her vulnerable to her father's evil side. After her mother's death, though, she and her elder sister Antonia were sent to a small monastery for Franciscan nuns in Rome. The family, though, lived in Rome at the Palazzo Cenci, and they lived with their extended family, including Count Francesco's second wife, Lorenzino Petroni, Beatrice's elder brother, and Bernardo, Francesco's son from his second marriage. They were very well off and wealthy, and they also owned a castle, La Rocca of Petal Alto, which was inside a small village in the mountains northeast of Rome. This shows how well off her family were. However, the Count, Beatrice's father, was a terrible man. He would regularly abuse his first wife and Beatrice's mother, and he also assaulted his sons and abused Beatrice terribly. He was truly a disgusting man despite his wealth, and he was even jailed for some of his crimes. But because of his money and status, the nobility, he was then freed early. Beatrice tried to tell the authorities of his terrible behaviour and of her ordeal at the hands of her father, despite being a young woman, but no action was taken, and the authorities did not act against him. There were many people in Rome, though, who were aware of the terrible goings-on at the Palazzo Cenci, but when her father found out that he had been reported, he banished Beatrice and her sister away from Rome to live in the family's castle, as he felt betrayed by them. However, the 4 Cenci children then decided that they had to try and get rid of their father, the Count, and they began to plot to kill him. In 1598, one of them, during one of the Count's stays at the castle, 2 servants drugged him with the children, and one of these was Beatrice's secret lover. Beatrice, her siblings, and their stepmother then gathered together, and armed with a hammer, they bludgeoned Francesco to death, and they then threw his body off the balcony to make it look like a tragic accident. But the death of a major noble was not something they could hide well, and the papal police decided to look into his absence. Beatrice's lover was investigated, and he was tortured by the police, and he died during this ordeal without telling what had happened. However, a family friend knew of the murder, and to avoid any information getting out, they ordered the murder of the second servant to avoid the risk. However, the plot was uncovered and discovered, and the 4 members of the Cenci family were arrested and were brought in for questioning. They were then placed on trial in Rome and were sentenced to death for the crime of murdering their father, regardless of the fact that he was an abusive and heinous man. The death sentence attracted a significant degree of criticism with the people of Rome, and they knew how awful the Count was, and that he was an abusive father, and because of this they protested against the decision and managed to postpone the execution of the Cenci family. The Pope, Clement VIII, however, was worried about a number of murders that were happening in Rome, especially with family members killing others, and to persuade other people to not commit murder against their family members, the Pope confirmed the death sentences, and they went ahead. Beatrice Cenci was around 22 years old when she was to be executed, and along with the other murderers and members of her family, she was taken to St. Angelo Bridge, where there was an execution scaffold which was built. This took the lives of many criminals inside of Rome, but in the care to the scaffold, Beatrice's elder brother was constantly beaten and tortured as the people followed and looked on. When the cart carrying the condemned reached the scaffold, Beatrice's brother's head was smashed to pieces with a mallet, and he was killed before his corpse was then quartered in front of the crowd. This was brutal for the crowd to have witnessed, and then the public executions continued with the executions of Lucrezia and Beatrice. The pair were taken to the block which was on the executioner's scaffold, and the executioner, armed with a small axe, then struck, and he took the head off of Beatrice clean. Only the 12-year-old Bernardo was spared the ordeal, but he was forced to watch the executions of his siblings and relatives before he was then sent to prison and had his property stolen and confiscated, with the Pope seizing control of it, but he was released a year later. Beatrice's headless body was buried inside the church of San Pietro in Montorio. However, in death, Beatrice became a legend to the people of Rome, and they used her story as a symbol of defiance against evil and arrogance of the aristocracy at times. Her story captivated the people of Rome and gave them inspiration, and it was said that she haunts the place of her execution. It's said that the night before her execution and the anniversary of it, that she carries her severed head on the bridge, returning to the place she lost her life. There has also been a lot of artwork and literature that has been inspired by the story of Beatrice Cenci and her family. Ultimately, the story of Beatrice and her family is one that her father's evil behaviour and actions led them to take extreme action and murder him. Today, Beatrice's actions, due to the abuse at the hands of her father, would be viewed differently, and she would have been seen as a victim. However, during this time in Rome, the Pope viewed her and her siblings and stepmother as dangerous murderers who needed punishing. Her story is one which is captivating, and at the age of 22, she had her head struck from her body. But she was a woman who was treated awfully throughout her life. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.